Good morning and happy Friday, folks. Thank you so much for joining Advocates for Ohio's Future, next installment in our budget series, focusing on the operating budget for fiscal years 24 and 25 in this current General Assembly. My name is Kelsey Berkfeld. I'm the Director of Advocates for Ohio's Future, joined by my Associate Sarah Hudasek, and we are the team that make up the leadership of our coalition. We are really excited today to talk to you about what we've been tracking and really what our partners around our AOF table have to share about what has been happening with the state budget. Lots of changes over the past 2 weeks. Of course, kind of as we get to this time throughout the cycle, things certainly pick up, speed up, and we are here to tell you about a lot of the changes, both for better or for worse, that are currently in the state budget bill, and that's House Bill 33, if you've been paying attention. So folks, just a few updates on timeline and really what has happened the last 2 weeks. We did see that sub bill a week before last, so this is the first reveal of the changes and kind of direction that House Finance and leadership within the House would like to see from their state budget bill and really reflects their priorities. After we saw the sub bill, there was one more chance for representatives to submit additions or amendments to the sub bill to that budget bill before it was before the full Finance Committee and House floor. We saw the reveal of that big omnibus amendment. I think it was honestly about 700 pages worth of amendment. Lots to go through quickly. I know I got my hands on it on Monday evening on the April 24th earlier this week. And then House Finance kind of accepted the sub bill to make sure that that was the bill that they were debating and they were voting on. And they went ahead. Really, there was only 2 amendments. One was kind of technical. One was a clarification amendment to that omnibus. I know in my 5 budgets, that was the first time. There weren't a ton of amendments offered during that House Finance hearing, but we did see a full vote out of full Finance on the budget on Tuesday, April 25th. And then the budget passed on the House floor this past Wednesday by a vote of 78 to 19. I know you may be thinking that does not equal 99. That's the number of representatives we have. I will say there are 2 current vacant House positions. So that is accounting for kind of the 2 less than we should have. And the folks who did vote against the budget, there were 17 Republicans and 2 Democrats voted against the budget. So very, very quickly, I just wanted to make sure you had a link to the omnibus amendment, as well as the executive versus House version comparison document. Now, this is really helpful as an advocate. This is really key in how I track changes along the process. It kind of gives a summary of the budget provision really by executive department, and then talks about the changes that have or have not happened from what the governor has proposed. So that is a really important document. That's, I know, how I keep track of things really moving forward, especially as we get into the Senate version. And then, eventually that 4th version, kind of the as fully passed in July version. It's interesting to see the 4 different columns, lots of pages, lots to go through, but it's really, really helpful. Folks, very, very quickly, I just wanted to touch on a number of provisions that our speakers today won't be covering. We have, again, a really, really fantastic wide range of experts and advocates here across health and human services to tell you really about the good and the bad. That is in that House passed version. We have increased funding for new broadband pole replacement, underground programming, which is fantastic. Again, if you're interested in the broadband space, this is great. It again is another step towards upgrading our infrastructure and access to broadband here in the state. We know that our direct care workforce did see, a raise in their base kind of reimbursement rate. Excited that we make sure community health, behavioral health services were included in that bump. We saw an additional $15 million per year for the Ohio Association of Food Banks and $10 million in fiscal year 24 for the Greater Cleveland Food Banks. This comes at a time when food insecurity is at its highest that we've seen. Specifically, again, if you've been with us for a while, the public health emergency ended, those SNAP emergency allotments have ended, and families have lost hundreds of dollars in SNAP support that they counted on the last 3 years. So these are really, really important funds. I'm really excited to see this increase. We saw an increase in the age limit for participation for Medicaid buy-in for workers with disabilities. Again, if folks want to work, this will help them do so. increased Medicaid reimbursement for federally qualified health centers and community health centers or lookalikes, FQHCs. Really excited to see this investment in these important services. Another increase in Medicaid reimbursement for ambulance transportation, assisted living, dental, nursing facilities, and vision. Again, fantastic to make sure that those services are there for folks who need them, as well as, again, this, I think Kelly's going to talk about this a little bit later, but continuous Medicaid coverage for eligible kids birth to age 3, which is fantastic. We know this is such an important and vital part of kids' development, and though that continual access to healthcare will certainly be or mean a significant impact on these kids. We also have increases in starting salary for teachers, fantastic, from $30,000 to $40,000 per year. And we saw the state will now cover the difference between reduced price breakfast and lunch and free breakfast and lunch for all students, which means that any student who qualifies for reduced price meals in schools will now receive them for free. So this is a fantastic addition. Really excited to be part of the coalition asking for this increase for free school meals for all, and excited about what is to come. So next slide really fast, just to give you a visual of really where we are in the process. That whole House version we're in the green. We've completed those steps. Moving into the Senate, we know that executive agencies are being heard in the Senate right now on their regular committee structure process. So like the House had those subcommittees that were specific for the budget, that Senate instead is hearing these budget hearings within standing committees. So make sure your topic is of interest. You take a look at those schedules, see when that department is up, maybe where, if you are testifying or would like to submit testimony, which standing committee would be most appropriate. So my friends, without further ado at all, I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Angela Sausser. She is with the Public Children's Services Association of Ohio to tell you about what has happened in the budget so far for the folks that she serves. I'm excited to hear from you, Angela. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey. And good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Sausser. I'm the Executive Director of PCSEO, and I'm going to give you an overview of what happened to children's services or child welfare in the state budget. So next slide. Children's Services is one of the programs moving over to the new Department of Children and Youth. Our primary line item in the ODGFS budget was $600,523. That transitions over to the KID department now, and that line item is now $830,506. In addition, when that line item transitioned to the new department, a few other funding streams that supported programs also collapsed into that new line item within the Department of Children and Youth. Next slide. So when we look at that line item for child welfare, in the executive budget, we received a considerable increase, and that has to do with expanding already existing programs, some new programs, and then we also received a considerable increase to the state child protection allocation, which is the direct funding line that our county public children's services agencies receive. So you could see the increase that in both the executive and for 24 and for 25, how much of an increase we received to what we are currently in state fiscal year 23. In the House Pass version, this is the line where we did receive a cut. It is a cut to the increase. So it's hard to know how to message this or feel about it at this point. So they did not take us back to being flat funded, which is good news. However, this will impact programs and their ability to expand, or impact programs that would have been new in the next biennium budget that the administration wanted to launch. This could have an impact in them being able to move forward. The good news is within this reduction of the increase in the House Pass budget, we were able to maintain our earmarks within that line item at 100%. So for those that have been following multi-system youth, over the last few years, that earmark remains within that line item at 100%. So that's $25 million a year for 24 and 25. We also maintained the Ohio Kinship and Adoption Navigator Program at 100% earmark, so that didn't receive a reduction at 8.5 million. In the executive budget, they proposed an increase to best practice incentives that are for our county public children's services agencies. That remains with the $5 million increase for a total of 10 million each year. And then in the executive budget, the administration proposed a substantial increase to the state child protection allocation with $25 million more in 24 and 25 million more in 25, and that remains in the House pass version. Next slide. The other earmark that we've been hoping to see restoration on is the Kinship Caregiver Program. This is a $10 million earmark within the TANF budget. And this program provides emergency assistance to kinship caregivers. Unfortunately, it was not earmarked in the executive budget, and we were not able to restore that earmark in the House pass budget. So we will be looking at restoration in the Senate. Next slide. So for the reduction in our primary funding line within the new Children and Youth Department, these are the possible impacts that reduction could have in that line item. That funding line supports services to foster and former foster youth, such as the Bridges program. The administration had hoped to stand up a new driver's license program for foster youth that could be impacted. That funding line also provides match dollars for education and training vouchers for former foster youth and a new youth navigator program. It also could impact services for parents who are interested in becoming adoptive parents, kinship caregivers, and there's an array of services and programs we have for kinship caregivers within that funding line. The administration we've been working closely with had hoped to set up a new tiered foster care system for foster caregivers that could be impacted by those cuts. And then also within that funding line are substance use disorder and parenting programs such as Ohio Start and Triple P, and that could also be impacted by that cut. And I just want to flag that Ohio Start also lives in the, I forgot to fill in the line item there, also lives within the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services budget, and that line item also received a 10% cut. Next slide. And we are still pursuing solutions within the state budget to impact our workforce crisis, which we continue to have, and I know all sectors are having, as well as our ongoing crisis of kids having to sleep at our county agencies because we are not able to find available and appropriate treatment options and placement options for them. So we are still pursuing solutions related to those two crises. Next slide. So that's a quick overview of the impact of the House pass budget on children's services. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in chat, or that's my contact information. Thank you.
Excellent, Angela, thank you so much. We did have one in the chat and it asks if these increases are attributed to inflation that you mentioned earlier.
The increases that were proposed in the executive budget were not related to inflation. It continues to be a focus of the governor and the governor's office and this administration to continue to invest in children's services and to move forward with many of the recommendations that came out of the governor's children's services transformation report.
Excellent, Angela. Much appreciated. Thank you again for being here. We'll keep an eye on the chat and the QA for additional questions from you, but thank you so much for your time this morning. Up next, we are excited to welcome Gina Bervejillo, hope that is somewhat close, of Policy Matters Ohio, to talk to us about the changes in the taxes, specifically income tax changes that are currently within the budget. So Gina, take it away when you can.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm going to focus on the income tax changes because they're a little bit complicated, but I will try to mention a few other tax elements of House Bill 33 and And yes, okay, so the primary thing I wanted to discuss today was the income tax changes, which, as you may know, they this bill basically did not. We were concerned about the possibility of a flat tax being proposed in the budget. We haven't seen it yet, which is great. It's a good step. But the tax change that we did see was not a full flat, but a flattening, perhaps a partial flattening of the tax brackets. So a removal of the second tax bracket and lowering the rate just by a little bit. Basically, the way that it's worth describing, because it's the tax bracket for people making between $46,000 and $92,000, the rate is going down from 3.2% to 2.75%. And the rate for people who are in the 26 to 46 bracket is going down from 2.76% to 2.75%. So what that makes it sound like, and the way that it's been misconstrued in the media and at the State House, is that it's a low to moderate income tax cut for people with low to moderate incomes. It makes it sound, when you just describe it like that, it makes it sound like the people who are going to get the tax cut are the people who are making between that $26,000 and $92,000. The truth of the matter is that, yes, while it's true that that's where the tax cut starts to take effect, the full impact of the tax cut, you don't receive the full impact of the tax cut unless you're at the top of that tax bracket. So unless you already have $92,000, $98,000 if you adjust for inflation for this tax year. So basically, you only get the full impact of this tax cut if you're in the top third of Ohio. So I want to reinforce that statement that this is not a middle income tax cut. It's actually a tax cut for the top third of Ohio, right? So the first slide that I'm showing you here is if you consider just the tax cut, just that tax cut that I just explained. So as you can see, families and individual taxpayers making less than $50,000 get zero or maybe $1 or $2 in tax cuts. And then there's a steep decline all the way to that $92,000 to $98,000. And then everybody beyond that gets a flat tax cut of $238. This is just that flattening element of the bill. However, this is not the only element of the income tax changes, and it's really important that we talk a little bit about what it means to suspend bracket indexing. So basically, current law as it exists adjusts the size of the exemptions and the size of the thresholds of the brackets to reflect inflation, so that if your income goes up with inflation, and you're like at the border of a threshold, you don't necessarily go into the next income tax bracket just because of inflation, right? So as the brackets are adjusting to inflation and your income is adjusting to inflation, hopefully everything is staying steady. But what they do in House Bill 33 is they suspend the indexing, they suspend the inflation adjustment, right? So what this means is that every income tax paying household is going to pay more taxes, but not in the way that we would like them to. No, it's not that the wealthier are paying their fair share. It's kind of like just a little bit of it's on purpose, but it's a little bit of a gimmick. I don't know. It's not the way that we would want to go about increasing taxes, especially because, as you will see on the next slide, here's where I've put together the two effects: the suspension of the bracket indexing and the tax cut. And what you'll see is that there's actually a group of people for whom the suspension of bracket indexing actually outweighs the tax cut, and it leads to a tax increase, right? So if you're in that small range, I should have written down those exact numbers, but basically in the low to middle income, because remember, the average household in Ohio, the median household in Ohio makes $62,000. So, okay. So, so it's worth noting that there's a small increase in taxes for that range of people. Then there's that decrease. And for the wealthiest folk, you'll see that they don't get the full amount of the tax cut because of that, the effect of the suspension of indexing, but they still get a very significant tax cut. The overall impact of this, next slide, is that more than half of the value of the tax cut of the altogether, the tax cut goes to the wealthiest 20% of Ohio. Only about 5.3% of the value will go to the bottom 60% of Ohio. And on average, people making between $23,000 and $75,000 per year will see a temporary tax increase. So this is important. So it's the suspension is temporary, and it outweighs a little bit of the cost and increases taxes, but the tax cut is permanent. And it's really important to recognize that that $400 million per year will be lost because of this tax cut for the foreseeable future. I'm going to just finish up by saying there are a bunch of other things that are on here in terms of tax exemptions and tax credits and stuff, tax expenditures, sorry. There's an expansion of the motion picture tax credit, $17 million that's wasted. And then there's a couple good things. There's a couple good things that maybe Gina from Ohio could talk about, and also some stuff towards survivors of East Palestine and so on. But yes, let me know if you have any questions, and I will pass the baton.
Yisha, thank you so much. Man, I just appreciate your insight on these provisions. I know it is very complicated and you have a great way of explaining them. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited next to hear from our friends Erin Ryan and Amy Meade from Groundwork, Ohio, to tell us about early childhood and infant, just what's happening with the kids. Take it away when you're ready.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thanks to you and Sarah for hosting today's conversation. My name is Erin Ryan. I serve as the director of the Center for Maternal and Young Child Health at Groundwork, Ohio. I'm joined by my colleague, Amy, who will introduce herself after I give a brief update on maternal infant health provisions in the budget to watch. So for folks not familiar with Groundwork, we are a committed, nonpartisan policy research and advocacy organization that focuses on the championing high quality early learning and healthy development strategies in that prenatal period to age 5. And we have our 3 centers of excellence that really help move forward the work around early childhood advocacy in Ohio. And what we do, a lot of the same folks on the call as well, just making sure we are advocating and elevating the needs of young children in our state house policy decision making. So when it comes to what is happening in the budget around some of the maternal young child health provisions, I know Kelsey shared a few things, and there'll be some other folks on the call who will be sharing some details. I wanted to focus my section on 2 key provisions that we are watching as an organization and that we are really going to be helping, working to advocate for some restoration of funds that were removed through the House process. So the first one we wanted to highlight was Help Me Grow, which is evidence-based home visiting. These are crucial services that support pregnant women, new moms and new parents as they really deal with welcoming a new child into their life and providing connections to different services and supports in their community. So we did see a big increase in investment in the home visiting program, Help Me Grow, through the governor's budget. Unfortunately, we did see a decrease of about $18 million over that 2-year biennium in the House version that recently passed this week. So our work in the budget is going to focus on, in the Senate, of trying to restore those funds to get us back up to the amount that the governor introduced in his budget. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second piece that we are focusing on in the infant, maternal, young child health space is around early childhood mental health consultation. So This would expand currently under resource services that contribute to positive outcomes for children facing mental health challenges and promoting better mental health into adulthood. So again, we saw a pretty significant increase in the governor's budget, and unfortunately a decrease of $10 million over the biennium in the House version. So I will turn it over to my colleague Amy to talk about some of the positive things we did see around early learning in the House version.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Meade. I am the director of the Center for Early Learning here at Groundwork, Ohio. So the Center for Early Learning had a few budget priorities, and we were pleased to see 2 of our amendments providing GRF investments in childcare and preschool were included. The first being early childhood education grants. This increases $15 million per fiscal year. And the idea is that programs can pilot full day preschool, be able to serve more kids, and just serving additional low income 3- and 4-year-olds in preschool. And then the second is infant and toddler childcare infrastructure grant. We know that many infant and toddler classrooms have closed specifically, especially during COVID. So this is really encouraging to see. This appropriates $15 million in each fiscal year to provide safe and developmentally appropriate childcare for infants and toddlers. We're focusing on the Appalachian communities and communities where with high infant mortality rates. The idea is that this would encourage programs to reopen classrooms, potentially pay teachers more, could be on facility improvement. So this is an exciting investment that we know is going to take some additional advocacy in the Senate. Some other amendments impacting early learning. We were disappointed that the $150 million ARPA funds for childcare scholarships and infant toddler capacity building were not restored. So that's one of our strategies in the Senate, is to be advocating for the restoration of those funds to be used for those scholarships. Additionally, there was nearly $1 million in each fiscal year for the Spark program in Ohio. And then there was
I think you're on mute.
How does that happen? I don't know.
Sorry.
You.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
That's about 30 seconds.
We've been circulating a workforce behind the workforce letter, which will include a full page ad in the dispatch, along with the digital sign-on letter, hopefully signed by thousands of professionals to help bolster the support. I'll drop this link in the chat. If you're interested in signing and or sending it to your next networks, we want this to be, we're going to take the digital ad next week. So we'd love to see as many signatures on the letter. Thank you all for your hard work. We recognize the progress we made, and we also acknowledge that, the fight for continued investments in early learning will require continuous advocacy in the Senate, and we look forward to advancing these efforts in the weeks ahead.
Amy and Erin, thank you so much for being here with us and for your advocacy, of course. Again, looks like there's been some progress, but again, the fight certainly continues. Next up, excited to introduce Kelly Vyzral from Children's Defense Fund, Ohio. Tell us some more about what's happening with kids. And I think we have some good news to report as well. So this is fantastic. Kelly, take it away when you're ready.
Yeah, I get the fun part.
Yeah.
And this is maternal and child health is wide ranging. So I do have some slides in here that I'm probably just going to skip because I know specifically other people have already covered it, or it's going to be covered in an upcoming presentation, one of the other presenters. So if you want to skip to the, I think we can probably skip the first slide because we know about the department and where that ended up. Early interventions, these are programs for infants and toddlers who are at risk or who are at risk of disability. Currently serves 25,000 children in Ohio. The language expands access to these early interventions for premature infants, and they don't have to have any other underlying disability or issue in order to be eligible for these funds. The House budget maintained the almost $47 million investment made by the executive budget. The omnibus bill added $2 million over the biennium to support families and children under the age of 3 with blindness or low vision. And it specifically earmarked it for certain groups around the state. Next slide, please. We can skip this. I know we already talked about the Help Me Grow. So the next slide is infant vitality. These funds support lots of different resources for pregnant women and infants, including cribs, smoking cessation programs, behavioral health, and the implementation of the Alliance for Innovation for Maternal Health Safety Bundles. And the executive budget funded this at those levels. And you can see all through the budget, they did this odd thing where they took out tiny little amounts of money to make it end in zero. I don't know what that's all about, but it happened all through the budget. But they did earmark, the omnibus bill did earmark $2 million out of this for Bridget's Path. That's a group that supports infant and maternal health for infants who are born substance exposed. So that's in the omnibus budget or bill. Next slide, please. This is a really exciting piece, increased coverage for moms and children. This increases the coverage for pregnant people and children to 300% of the federal poverty level. And the House maintained this coverage. We're certainly hoping the Senate does the same. According to American Community Survey, this is going to affect approximately almost 25,000 uninsured children under the age of 19 that are in that range between 212 and 300%. And then as far as pregnant women, almost 34,000 women between 19 and 44. Those are the reproductive years. And again, it covering those people between 206 and 300%. Next slide. Pathway Community Hubs and the doula program. So Pathway Hubs have been paying for doulas for many years, and they use grants, health infant grants and other types of grants to pay for this care. The executive budget expanded this program so that it can be implemented in other communities serving high-risk pregnant Black women. There was also language added in the House budget to provide Medicaid coverage of doula care services, which we're super excited about. And as a side note, House Bill 7 also has some doula language in it. So one way or another, this is happening. Next slide, please. Medicaid in schools is another piece that we're super excited about. It just allows all Medicaid eligible children to access Medicaid services in schools. This was proposed by the governor, maintained in the House. Next slide, please. Medicaid continuous eligibility 0 through age 3. This was added by the House, and we couldn't be, I mean, these pieces that I'm talking about really do put Ohio out front in taking care of children in their Medicaid program. This just requires Medicaid to file a waiver, submit a waiver to continuously cover, or so that children are continuously eligible for Medicaid through their 3rd birthday, so until they turn 4. We would advocate for age 6 because that gets them through till they start school, so that they can make sure they have all those important developmental screenings. But we'll take 3. That's a start. It's a great start. Next slide, please. And I think Gina's probably going to cover this, so I will skip to the next slide, my last one. And this is nutrition. The executive budget had provisions in there to require more cooperation between WIC and SNAP. in order to increase participation in those programs. The House maintained that language. And then the omnibus bill comes out, surprising us all with funding to cover the cost of school breakfast and lunch for students who qualify for reduced price meals. My colleague Catherine and Hunger Free Schools group really worked hard on this, and we're super excited that this is now part of the budget, and we're going to work real hard to make sure it stays in there in the Senate. And that's all for me. I'll pass it back to Kelsey. Thank you very much.
Kelly, thank you so much. We love to hear, again, some great gains in the state budget for kids and moms. Great news. Again, hopefully we continue to make progress in the Senate. Up next, we are excited to welcome Gina Wilt with Ohio to tell us what's happening in the housing space and what progress is made and what is left to continue the fight in the Senate. So Gina, whenever you're ready, take us away.
Sure, thank you. And really appreciate Kelly's presentation. And I do not have slides, so I'll just go through everything quickly and hopefully in a clear way. But we are, housing, Ohio, obviously our mission is to end homelessness and promote affordable housing. And we really, truly believe that we can end homelessness in Ohio. This isn't some dream. It is possible if we make the investments in the right places and put the resources to work. We really do truly believe that we can end homelessness, and especially in combination with all the great work that everyone else on the call is doing. Housing is foundational to all of that work. And so if we can work on stable housing for all people, then all the work that you're doing is going to be that much more productive. So very excited to be able to share. The governor, he decided when he dropped his language that he really wanted to address housing. I think he said the term that he used was in a holistic fashion. And so most of what the governor put in his budget, the House kept, which is great. There were some tweaks, but for really overall, the House continued to support the governor's vision and emphasize the importance of housing. So the big ticket item that has gotten the attention of the Chamber of Commerce and the realtors and the Ohio Business Roundtable, in which we're glad they're very engaged and we need their help, is on building more affordable housing. And so including a state tax credit to help the federal low-income housing tax credit, but to have a state low-income housing tax credit is an incredibly important tool in the toolbox to make sure we end homelessness. We can't end homelessness unless we build more units. We need housing to end homelessness. So we support the proposal that would create this multifamily housing. It's an economic development tool, a tool in our toolbox. And so that was also House Bill 3. So House Bill 3, Gail Pavliga and Representative McNally. Last General Assembly, it was Gail Pavliga and Representative Hoops. So that House Bill 3, they did put that into the budget bill. So they did tweak the governor's language, and we preferred the House Bill 3 language. It was a little bit more robust. And so that is now in the budget, and we fully support that. Another provision that Kelly touched on that's the governor put in and also stayed in with the House budget is Healthy Beginnings at Home, which provides interventions for pregnant women who are at risk of infant mortality. And so that stayed in the budget. And we are hoping that will stay, obviously, that everything will stay in the Senate as well. And I know we've talked about Healthy Beginnings at Home quite a bit, so I won't go into details, but happy to answer questions if anybody has any questions. The other items that stayed in include the spending authorization for the Ohio Housing Trust Fund, which the Ohio Housing Trust Fund is the state's primary and most significant resource for housing and homeless services. So it's really our only statewide source for ending homelessness through, supports our shelters, supports aging in place, and also supports developers with gap financing and other development tools through the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. So it's not a GRF ask, it was just a spending authorization increase. And so that stayed in, and which is great. And then a couple other items, of course, the one GRF ask that stayed in, and like Kelly also mentioned, they did change the numbers a little bit, so it could be a more even number, but what is for youth homelessness. So putting attention directly with our youth. And so there's youth homelessness program that goes through the Ohio Department of Health that we've had, and that stayed in, which is great. And that goes through Ohio Department of Health. And then there's another line that relates to working with the Ohio Department of Education and making sure that they have people in the schools to help children who are experiencing housing instability and preventing homelessness with the students. So that all stayed in. One item that I'll mention is the housing technical assistance line that was in there from Ohio Department of Development. They kept the language, but they zeroed out the funding, and it relates to helping local governments who might want to update their zoning and planning codes. It would have given them grants. So local governments could have applied to Ohio Department of Development to get money to help them update their zoning. And it is expensive to update zoning codes, especially if you're a town that your zoning code goes back to like 1943. You would want to be updating that. And I definitely would not want to be the lawyer who updates. I'm not a lawyer, and I would not want to be even the person who reads through old zoning codes and updating them. So it does take someone with lots of expertise, and you have to have a lot of collaboration, and you have to bring everyone around the table in the community to update those zoning codes and planning. So we were hopeful, because that was such a great long-term, we always talk about systems changing, and that would be a great way to just big picture, long-term, help not only build housing, that help with any economic development that a local community might want to do. So that, again, the coning and zone reform grants for localities, the language stayed in, but that was zeroed out. So we'll be working in the Senate to ask for that to be put back in. It was 1.5 million, which isn't much, but it was at least a good start and would have helped some locals who have an interest in doing that to get that done. And the other item that we're going to be asking for in the Senate, which did not make it in the House, is to continue the work for Housing Now for Homeless Families, which would use TANF dollars to support needy families, temporary assistance for needy families, to prevent homelessness through evidence-based practice called rapid rehousing, which we know works. And we had our success rate with Housing Now for Homeless Families was really significant, incredible work being done. And the statistics of people going through the rapid rehousing program using Housing Now for Homeless Families, they're not going back into the homeless system. So when we're using this best practice, we're preventing their homelessness, and they're not entering back into the system. So we will be going back to the Senate to ask for some TANF dollars for Housing Now for Homeless Families. But that's pretty much it for now. So we're overall, we feel very good about what the governor, his intentions are, and then same with the House. And we know we're only at the 50-yard line. We have to work with the Senate now, and we look forward to working with them and engaging with them, and hope that they will keep all of the good work that has already happened.
Gina, thank you so much for your comments and for sharing so much with us this morning. Up next, we do have Tim Johnson from the Ohio Poverty Law Center. And just a quick aside to our panelists, we do have a number of kind of big picture questions coming up, either to be answered live at the end We will have time at the end. My goodness, can you believe? We're doing great on time, as well as there's some big picture questions in the Q&A if you'd like to tackle those while we hear from Tim about lead poisoning prevention. Tim, take it away.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This is Tim Johnson from the Ohio Poverty Law Center, policy advocate, and also a member of the Ohio Lead-Free Kids Coalition, where I help to chair the Lead-Free Kids Coalition leadership team. And I'm just going to briefly go over where we are with lead poisoning prevention in the as passed by House version. So before we get started, as always, I'd like to remind folks that there is no safe level of lead in a child's bloodstream. Any lead is bad. Lead is a neurotoxin and leads to all sort of negative health outcomes that I'll talk about in just a bit. A reminder that the #1 source of lead poisoning comes from lead dust from lead paint in old housing. And even though lead paint was outlawed all the way back in 1978, 2/3 of our housing stock currently was built before 1980. Nearly 430,000 children live in those homes under the age of 6. And so they are at risk of being exposed to lead hazards at any time. A reminder that every single county has young children in these homes. This is not an urban problem. It's not a suburban problem. It's not a rural problem. It's Ohio. And that Ohio specifically, the percentage of children testing positive for elevated blood lead levels is double that of the national average. And we have the second highest rate of children testing positive for elevated blood lead levels in the country. So Ohio does have a big problem when it comes to lead poisoning. Next slide. A reminder that the lifelong impacts of lead include decreased bone and muscle growth, speech and hearing and language problems, damage to your nervous system. You can have developmental delays, cognitive issues, decreased IQ, attention deficit disorder. A study by Case Western University found that children who have elevated blood lead levels are at a lower chance of being ready for kindergarten, at a lower chance of reading at a grade level, more likely to interact with the juvenile justice system as a child, and then with the adult justice system as an adult, and more likely to require all sorts of public health and other services. So there is no cost savings for the state if we ignore lead poisoning prevention. Next slide. So what's still in the budget? What have we done? What's sort of changed? What hasn't changed since the House passed the budget on Wednesday? Well, I'm happy to report that SCHIP lead abatement funding currently remains in the budget. The SCHIP lead abatement program is a program that allows for the Department of Health in conjunction with the Department of Medicaid to go into homes where there is a pregnant woman or a child living under 6 in there who has tested positive for lead poisoning and do sort of a full abatement. They've abated over 400 homes to date. And it's a great way for ODH to really get into some of these problem areas and do full lead abatement within a home where we know a child has been poisoned. Funding remains for Cleveland's lead poisoning prevention effort, and Cleveland has really become sort of a model for the entire state on how local governments can really step up their lead poisoning prevention efforts. The state has been funding them for the past several budgets now at $1 million each fiscal year, so we're happy to see that continue. We know that Cleveland has been able to leverage those dollars with private partnerships just to create a lot of different funding for their ongoing lead ordinance and their lead prevention efforts. And so we're very happy that was maintained. H2 Ohio funding for lead service lines remains in the budget as well. That's great to see because I mentioned that we are #2 for the number of kids that test positive for elevated blood lead levels. We also have the second highest number of lead service lines in the country as well. So finding those, mapping those, and then ultimately replacing those lead service lines are important. And so we're happy to see that the governor's commitment to doing that was maintained by the House. I think Kelly mentioned this earlier, but Part C, early intervention. There is a small number of those dollars that go to children under the age of 3 who test positive for elevated blood lead levels. They are eligible to receive early intervention services. And so we were happy that was maintained in the budget as well. And then lastly, RRP language, or renovation, repair, and painting rule language is in the budget. So for those who don't know what that is, RRP essentially is a rule that was passed by the federal EPA back in 2010 that requires contractors who are doing work in older homes built before 1978, where there may be these lead paint hazards in them, to do repair work, renovation work, or painting work in a lead safe manner so they're not accidentally accidentally stirring up that lead dust that we talked about as the #1 source of child poisoning, and to make sure that all of those things are being taken care of, things are topped off, and they're using proper sealants and all those different things, so they're not inadvertently poisoning kids when they're doing basic home maintenance and repair work. That is a federal rule. It's currently enforced by the federal EPA, but they do sort of a haphazard job of doing it. States are allowed to take over enforcement of this rule, and that's been a priority of Governor DeWine and the Department of Health. And there's language in the budget to allow the Department of Health to assume that enforcement responsibility. And we're happy to see that that was maintained in the budget. Next slide. But there was a big cut in the budget, and that's lead abatement line item 440527 in the Department of Health. This line item was actually created in the last budget by Governor DeWine to really consolidate the state's lead poisoning prevention efforts. And so it's a fairly recent line item, but one that's completely dedicated to the funding of lead abatement work. It was cut from 10.8 million in 2024 and 11.65 million in 2025 to the current level of 6.5 million each fiscal year. So that's what the FY 2023 funding currently is. And so it's essentially flat funded from that level going forward. This is a rollback of what Governor DeWine committed to doing. Unfortunately, he promised to double lead poisoning prevention funding in his budget, both on the campaign trail and the state of state and in other forums. And he did do that. So it was upsetting to see that the House sort of slashed that funding and sent that amount to a lower level. I can say that the cut does not appear to be specifically targeted towards lead. There were a lot of programs within ODH's sort of area that was cut. So it looks like an overall reduction of the department's funding rather than a specific targeted cut aimed at lead specifically for whatever reason. So very hopeful that that means we'll be able to get that back. But what does that ultimately look like if this funding's cut? Well, there are three things I really want to draw attention to. First is the Lead Safe Home Fund, which is something that the governor and ODH established in the last budget. It is a first of its kind grant program that allows for communities across the state to either apply for funding to start up their own lead poisoning prevention programming if they don't have it already, or to expand on existing programs that they already have. And so they did this last budget. It worked really well. We saw some great successes across the state with the program. We were really looking forward to seeing expanded so more communities across the state have the opportunity to take advantage of it. And so cutting the funding puts that ability at jeopardy. And so we're a little disappointed to see that. The enforcement of the RRP rule I talked about, there is going to be some initial startup costs for the state to be able to start enforcing these rules, to make sure that there's somebody who monitors compliance and is reaching out to different contractors so they're aware of what their responsibilities are. If the funding is cut, we're worried about their ability to be as effective as possible. And then finally, funding for delegated health authorities. Currently, right now, the state of Ohio is considering a change in their rules to allow for kids to be tested at lower levels for lead. So we're picking up kids earlier in the process, so they're not getting poisoned before we finally are able to test them and figure out where they are in the elevated blood lead level area. And so there will be an increased caseload for delegated health authorities to handle all those new incoming children and provide them with the services that they need, as well as to do the screening and testing and all of those different things for children across the state. And so with those increased responsibilities, they're going to need additional funding. There was funding in that line item set aside for that specific purpose. And now it's unclear how much of that is going to be able to go to these delegated health authorities to be able to do that work as the state of Ohio looks to lower its blood lead level references. So again, we were fairly disappointed to see this cut come through the House. We are currently working with our Senate partners as we speak to try to make sure that they understand the importance of this funding and hopefully to see that restored over in the Senate. And so we are continuing to work on that. We just want to thank AOF for the time for allowing me to sort of lift this up and make sure that folks understand the importance of lead poisoning prevention, and to remind everybody that there is no true funding or cost savings to not funding lead poisoning prevention. If we don't do this now, we will see it downstream and we will pay for it tenfold later on.
Tim, thank you so much for being here today and for giving us that rundown on such, again, like you said, an important and certainly, I mean, timely is not even appropriate because this has been an issue for a very, very long time, and the time to do something is certainly now. So thank you for staying with us so far. We have a number of questions for our presenters today, and then just very quickly wanted to address one. So I will say, we try to get one of our behavioral health folks to join us to talk about home and community-based services and kind of the waiver increases and direct care service providers that we saw. We're not able to join us today, but we did know there was a question particularly about the 20% increase in Medicaid reimbursement for behavioral health services that I know a number of our partners around the table have been advocating for. Yes, the sub-bill did increase it to 10%. There was no additional movement from that 10% level in the omnibus or in the as passed by the House version. So certainly advocacy in the Senate is needed to continue to push for that additional boost. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Again, we shared a lot of positives. Again, there were certainly places where ground was lost or proposed increases were cut throughout the process so far. But really, if you could share, if anyone would like to talk about kind of biggest threats in the Senate. We know that each chamber has their own priorities, leadership between the chambers have different priorities. What would you imagine to be a threat either in your sector or kind of maybe to health and human services overall, if you have anything to share?
I can share since I had my camera on. Kelsey, this is Gina again from Ohio, and I did not mention that one thing that also got cut in the House was the single family home tax credit that the governor had in his original budget. I think he had maybe 25 million each year for a single family tax credit, and that got cut. And so I do anticipate that the Senate might take that up. Their leaders have talked about the importance of home ownership, which absolutely we support. We want home ownership for people who want home ownership. And so I could see them putting maybe the single family tax credit back in. Our hope is that they don't take out the multifamily tax credit to put in the single family tax credit. It doesn't have to be an either or. We really see this as an and both. We are short 270,000 units for low income families. We have Intel coming, Intel's here. We have the battery plant coming, and we have lots of things going on in Ohio, lots of great economic development happening. And we do need housing, and we need all types of housing. We need the whole spectrum. So last year we were short, I think, 254,000 units for low income families. In low income working families. This year we're short 270,000 units. So we're increasing in the shortage. So hopefully the Senate understands the need, and that is across the board, and that if they want to do the single family tax credit, that's great. They should do that, but they should not do it at the risk of getting, at the multifamily, because we need all types of housing for workforce, for our seniors, who are our friends and neighbors who are aging in place, as well as for our families. So that would be one thing that I'm worried about a little bit in the Senate, because of their strong focus on only single family versus multifamily.
Thanks for that, Gina. Any other big gaps or things missing in the as passed House budget that we are concerned about in the Senate?
Hi, Amy here with Groundwork, Ohio. As always, we're just a little bit concerned because the Senate in previous budgets have been hostile to childcare. So we're just a little concerned about the amendments that were added in the omnibus budget. And so hoping that there's some things in there that could be enough for Senate leadership to kind of leave. And did I go on mute again? Am I back? Golly. Thank you.
Just for a second.
Okay. So just hoping that there are some things in there that could kind of be enough for Senate leadership to leave childcare alone.
Leave alone or continue to support the increases and maybe even make them
Yes.
better, right?
Yes,
Right? Let's shoot for the
exactly.
stars.
Yes.
Any other big picture thoughts? All right, folks, seeing none, just very briefly from AOF standpoint, we of course always have our eye on different public programs that we know have been really important for folks as we continue to recover from the public health emergency, things continue to get back to normal. A lot of those supports and continuous supports that have been in place over the past 3 years are rolling off. So we are keeping our eye out for any changes to eligibility, to additional requirements or administrative burdens and others across public programs for healthcare, food access, and others across the state. So we are keeping our eyes peeled for those. We heard about some rumors of them being included in the House. They were not, but we know that there's certainly an appetite in the Senate for those kind of provisions to be added. So stay tuned. Certainly this will be another couple-week-long process in the Senate, and we will be coming back to you in a week or so with another focus on one of our issue areas here in the Senate. And you can, of course, always connect with us via our website. We post lots of updates about the process and where we're at, along with testimony and such on our website. And please follow us on social media, and you can connect with us via our emails and our weekly newsletter. If you have not signed up for that yet, folks, very, very helpful and the fastest way to get the most up-to-date kind of week by week updates from AOF here as we continue during this busy time. So folks, again, appreciate you for staying with us. Thank you so much for our panelists. We're so grateful for you for volunteering your time this morning and pulling together slides and just being incredible advocates that you are. So thanks for being here. We will see you in about 2 weeks for our next installment of What's in the Budget and following this process. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Remember, we will send around the recording and slides from this presentation in just a few hours this afternoon. So keep an eye out on your inbox and we will see you next time. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.